It's not every day you get to see Alabama lose a game. Tennessee was -7 and we got tickets to see them capture the W for the first time in 15 years. Kai and I stormed the field and became full-on volunteers for the night.
Let's fucking go!
After the goalpost came down, we stayed for another hour on the field and even smoked a cigar with a fan. We finally leave the stadium and continue celebrating in what was a scene out of Project X. Party's over, time to make some money on the felt. Here at Caesars, Southern Indiana, we're into the 2-5 game for $1,000. First hand of the night, I look down at Ace Jack of Hearts from the low jack. Few limps to me and I raise it up to $20, and only the big blind and middle position put in the call, bringing us to a flop which comes King 8-4 with 2 hearts. When the action checks over to me, I make a standard bet for $40, only garnering the attention of middle position, who puts in the call, leading us off to a turn. The turn now comes the 7 of spades and he checks it over to me for a second time. When he calls me on the flop, he's either going to have a worse heart draw or he's going to have a king or maybe a hand like 8s or 4s. For that reason, I decide to check behind and see if I can improve on the river. The river card comes the 3 of hearts. Bang! We river the nut flush. Dream spot for me rivering the nut flush, and he now decides to take up the betting lead and bets into me for $60. He only has around $400 left in his stack, so I decide to jam all in, covering him, and unfortunately he doesn't want to put any more money in. It appears that $60 bet was sort of a blocker bet, and when he folds, we're taking down that pot, but it feels pretty good nonetheless. Next hand of the night, we look down at 6 deuce of clubs from the button. I put in the straddle because I do that occasionally, gotta have some fun. The big blind and the cutoff both call, and we're off to a flop 3 ways, which comes 9, 3 deuce, all hearts. When the flop checks around, the turn comes the deuce of spades. Bang! We turn 3 of a kind. Great spot for me, and the big blind now leads out for $25. The cutoff re-raises to 120, which is definitely pretty strange. I don't really think the opponents would check the flop through with 2 hearts in their hand, so I'm pretty sure I have the best hand at this point. When the cutoff bets out for $120, which is an all-in, I decide just to put in the call and the big blind folds. That means we are heads up to a runout. I quickly turn over my cards immediately to see if he'll show his, and he says, "Oh man, I can only win with a 3. Not exactly sure what he has. The river card comes a 4, and he announces he has a straight, so I don't know if that's a needle or a slow roll or what's going on here. But then he turns over 3-5 for just a pair, so of course we're going to scoop down that pot, and we're 2 for 2 on the night. Moving right along to this next hand, I look down at Jack 9 offsuit from the button. I put in the $10 straddle once again, and we get 3 callers, so we're going off to a flop when I check my action, which comes Jack high, Jack 4-3 with 2 clubs. The small blind bets out for $15 and the hijack decides to put in the call. I think about my options for a second with 2 clubs out there, but ultimately I just have a jack with a pretty mediocre kicker, so I decide to toss in 3 red chips, and that brings us 3 ways to the turn, which comes a black card which we don't want to see, but it's the queen of spades, so not exactly the worst card in the deck. The small blind does not slow down, he continues for $40, and the hijack doesn't wave the white flag, he puts in the call as well. Action's back onto me. No sense in raising here, I put in the $40 again, and we are off 3 ways to a river, which comes the 5 of spades. Really shouldn't change anything unless the opponents have a hand like ace deuce or maybe 6-7, although that would just be a gutter, so it'd probably have to be 6-7 of clubs specifically. Action's back onto the small blind, and now he decides to slow down and check. When the hijack decides to check as well, I ponder for a second before ultimately deciding to check behind with my showdown value. Not trying to get blown off my hand if I go for a half pot size bet and then an opponent turns a busted club flush draw into a bluff and I'd have to fold my Jack 9 offsuit. The small blind doesn't show, the hijack turns over Jack 8 of hearts, and it looks like we're going to take down that pot. Our 9 kicker is going to play. Maybe could have got a little bit of extra value, but oh well, no complaints from myself. I end up topping up $1,400 more because it's a 50% match the stack game and someone has a $5,000 stack. Next hand, we're going to battle with Jack 10 of diamonds from the cutoff. Few limps over to me, so I decide to raise it up to $20. The big blind and early position both put in the call, and that's leading us 3 ways to a flop, which gives us an open-ended straight draw. The flop comes 9-9-8 with 2 spades, and both the players check it over to me. I'm in the cutoff, and I go for a standard bet of $35. The big blind puts in the call and the early position gets out of the way. That means we're heads up to a turn. I'd love to see a queen or a 7 that's not a spade, but instead we get a 10 giving me a pair, but it is a spade, so it's a double-edged sword. When the big blind checks it over to me for a second time, I decide to check behind. The logic is he could be slow playing a spade flush. He also could have a 9 in his hand, and I have some showdown value, so I'll check behind here and call a bet on the river if he wants to bluff into me. When the river card comes the ace of diamonds, that's a better card for my range than it is his. So for that reason, I think he's smart and he checks it over to me. I'm pretty happy to get to a showdown, and I quickly check behind, turning over my pair of 10s. He says nice catch on the turn, although I did have a lot of outs. Any queen, 7, 10, or jack probably would have given me the best hand. And just like that, I'm taking down yet another pot. This next hand's a fun one. I go to battle with my favorite hand, pocket 7s from the small blind. Few limps to the cutoff, who raises it up to $25, and instead of going for a 3-bet up to 75 or 100, I decide just to put in the call. I want to bring in a bunch of players and flop a 7 and win a large pot. That's exactly what happens. 3 other players put in the call, so step A of the formula is complete, and now step B, we gotta flop that 7. The dealer doesn't listen to my inner thoughts. The flop comes 5-4 deuce with 2 clubs, and the action checks over to the cutoff, who bets out for $30. Now I know I didn't flop a 7, but we're getting a great price to call. Additionally, we could back into maybe a straight of some sort, or a 7 on the turn or river would definitely give me the best hand. So for that reason, I put in the $30 and the big blind does as well. We don't improve on the turn. It comes the queen of diamonds, and the action checks over to the cutoff once again, and now he decides to bet out for $50. We both called his bet on the flop for $30, and now we're both going to call his $50 bet on the turn, and that's going to bring us off to a river. The river card does not improve me in the slightest. It comes the deuce of spades, although I guess both the club and diamond flush draws have brick, so that's something positive at least. But when the action checks over to the cutoff for a 3rd time, he now bets out for $200. Went for that 30, then that 50, and now he ramps it all the way up to $200. No bueno for me. I'm not going to bluff catch with my pocket 7s, although it is my favorite hand. And when we both put in the fold, he turns over pocket 9s. So yes, he had the best hand. Could have raised him and won that pot, but how am I supposed to know? He's betting all 3 streets with pocket 9s. $26.50 in my stack. I look down at 6-8 of clubs from under the gun. The button put the $10 straddle on and the action's on me. I decide to raise it up to $35 to mix it up here and there. The player on my left and the button both put in the call, and that's leading us 3 ways to a flop. The flop comes 10-8 deuce with 1 club, so not the worst board in the world. We flop ourselves middle pair and a backdoor club flush draw, but being out of position to both opponents is not exactly ideal, so I start with a check. The action checks over to the button, and he takes up the lead and bets out for $50. I'm going to get a little bit sticky and put in the call. Can't be folding when I make a pair and I have some backdoor draw ideas, so I put in the $50 and I'm the only one to do so. We're off to the turn. When the turn comes the 4 of hearts, I'm not going to be leading into the button, especially when he bets out on the flop, so I check it over to him. He doesn't think too long before checking behind, so it's possible I have the best hand at this moment, and now the river card comes in the 9 of diamonds. Not wanting to see a large bet on the river where I'm going to be in a tough spot, so I decide to blocker bet a 10th of the pot for $20. He quickly puts in the call, so maybe we have the best hand, but unfortunately he turns over 10-7 offsuit for top pair. But it's likely he would have gone for a much larger bet than $20, so it's possible that I save some money on that river. Next hand, 10-9 of clubs from the button, and I raise it up to $20 when it folds over to me. Only the big blind puts in the call, leading us to a flop which comes king 5-5 rainbow. He checks it over to me, and I go for a standard 1/3 pot size bet of $15, and he pretty quickly puts in the call, bringing us off to a turn, which comes a great card for my range. It's the ace of spades. When he checks it over to me for a second time, it's possible he has some middling pairs like pocket 8s, pocket 9s. He also could have a hand like king 10, king jack, king queen. It's not too often he's going to be floating with a hand that has an ace in it, unless it's ace-5 of hearts or ace-5 of clubs. So because his range is so narrow and the ace is much better for me, I decided to continue betting on this card even though I just have 10 high, and I bet out for $65. Not expecting the opponent to call too often, so when he does, alarm bells are going off in my head. I'm definitely going to slow down and check behind on the river, and when the river card comes the 6 of diamonds, he doesn't give me the option to do so. Yes, he doesn't check it over to me, he decides to bet into me for $200, making my decision that much easier. I take a second before mucking to save a little bit of face, but he's going to win that pot, in which was an interesting hand. If you guys are enjoying this video so far, please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any other cool videos in the future. On to the next one. I look down at ace-king offsuit from the big blind, 2650 in my stack, and the button put the straddle on. Small blind puts in the call, so I decided to raise it up to $55 with a beautiful hand like ace-king offsuit. Came in on my left, he's in early position and raises it up to $125 now, which isn't a very large 3-bet. When the action folds all the way back around to me, I decide to play for stacks. He doesn't have that much more, around 350 more in his stack, so let's play for all of it. I'm not trying to just put in the call, see a 10 high flop, and then force to fold. I want to see all 5 cards. I rip it all in, and he pretty quickly calls, and we both turn over ace-king. In situations like this, I'm not greedy, I just want to make the flush, so I let the table know, and especially the dealer, your boy isn't greedy over here. He just wants to see all clubs or all hearts. But maybe it's karma for being sarcastic because the dealer decides to put all spades. Cayman has the ace of spades in his hand and there's already 3 spades on the flop. This is absolutely horrible. We're going to lose a $1,000 pot, ace-king versus ace-king. The turn comes the 9 of clubs, which is a big sigh of relief. And the river card, phew, it comes the 10 of clubs. So just like that, we're going to chop that pot like we expected to, although the flop gave us a little bit of a sweat. 2700 in my stack. I look down at the beautiful pocket aces, the bullets from under the gun, and I raise it up to $20. We're going to get 4 callers. That means we're 5 ways to the flop. So with $100 in the pot, the flop comes king 7-4 rainbow, a beautiful board for my hand. When the action's on me, I decide to bet out for $55, and only the cutoff puts in the call, so at this point, I'm putting him on a wide range of hands. He could have any of the pocket pairs, including 7s or 4s. He could have any assortment of the kings, and he even could have a hand like 5-6. When the cutoff puts in the call, we see the 7 of hearts on the turn, which isn't exactly the best card, but it's not the worst because I guess it makes pocket 7s a little bit less likely. Sure, you could have a hand like 7-8 or 7-6, but we can't really be too worried about that just yet. Now, I decide to check in the moment and let me explain my logic. I'm not too sure I'm going to get 3 streets of value from any other hand besides ace, king, or king, queen. Now, keep in mind the cutoff did not re-raise me pre-flop, so I'm pretty much excluding those hands from his range. So if he has a king in his hand, it's going to be hands like king 10, king 9, king 8, and of course king 7, which has a boat. For that reason, I'm not too sure I'm going to get 3 streets of value, so I look to play it a little bit tricky with only the 5-6 being a draw out there available. When I check it over to the cutoff, he decides to check behind, and that brings us off to the river, which comes a harmless 3 of spades. So now, having checked on the turn and him having checked behind, it's possible he does have one of those kings, so I decide to go for a polarizing overbet of $250. Maybe this overbet could also trick him into calling with hands like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, just not believing I have a king when I check on the turn, so I really like my decision to check the turn and overbet the river. However, that being said, overbetting the river doesn't exclude me from being raised. Sure, I expect him to fold a lot of the time. I also expect him to call a small percentage of the time. What I don't expect him to do is 3-bet me to $750. It's definitely a weird line by going for a re-raise on the river after checking behind the turn. You'd think if he'd have a 7, he would have bet the turn himself, although I guess there's not many draws out there, so he could play it sneaky and go for value on the river. And if he was bluffing, you think he'd go a little bit larger, like 250 to 750 is only a 3x. Maybe he would go 1,000, 1,250. It's not too often that people bluff on the river to begin with, let alone bluffing on the river for a small sizing. So for that reason, not wanting to put in an additional $500, I decide to fold my cards face up. And although he doesn't show me in the moment, he ends up telling me later on after the hand off the table that he had a 7 and it was a suited connector with a 7 in his hand. So although you're not really supposed to believe people at the poker table, he was a nice guy and he wanted to tell me after the hand that I made a good fold. So I definitely appreciate that, and hopefully that'll save me getting roasted in the comments just a little bit. Last hand of the night, I have 2,400 in my stack, and I look down at pocket 9s from the +1 position. Under the gun raises it up to $15, and I 3-bet him to $45. 4 players put in the call. That means we're going 5 ways to a flop with pocket 9s, and the flop comes ace, jack, jack with 2 clubs. With a good amount of money in there and a bunch of other players in the hand, I'm not wanting to bet out here and then get raised. Anyone could have an ace, anyone could have a jack, so I decide to check and the action gets checked around. If we were to choose any card in the deck to see on the turn, it would definitely be a 9. And that's exactly what we get on the turn when it comes to 9 of clubs. Bang! We turn a boat. Not even needing a red 9 as we now fill up. We're hoping someone has a club flush or any jack in their hand, unless of course it's ace jack. Douglas in the small blind now bets out for $60 and the action's back over to me. It's possible he has a club flush, it's possible he has a jack, so I don't think raising is a really bad move, but instead I decide just to put in the call. Having him in position is very important for just putting in the call. If I was out of position, I'd for sure go for the check raise, but being in position, I can call here, see what he does on the river, and then either raise him or put in a chunky size bet. Not really any card I'm worried about on the river, so when I put in the call and we see the 3 of spades, it's a harmless card, and I'm going to go for some chunky value. Douglas now decides to check it over to me, which is definitely unfortunate, although I do think if he had a jack, he might check it over to me and look to call a bet, instead of going for a bet and then getting raised by any 2 clubs. So I don't really hate his check if he's doing this with a jack. Still, I gotta go for chunky value with my boat. Gotta target all those flushes, I gotta target all the jacks in his range, and I decide to bet out for $390. I think this is a bet that puts him in a tough spot. Sure, I could have some jacks, sure I could have some club flushes, but I'm also going to have my pocket 9s, my beautiful set which evolved into a boat, and after some hemming and hawing, he doesn't love it, but he puts more chips in the middle. $390 go into the middle, and he's not going to see those anymore. Sorry for that, Douglas, but I'm taking down this amazing hand to end the night. He ends up showing a jack, so that makes a lot of sense, but we're going to get rewarded with this $1,100 pot. And that's going to wrap up our session. We rack up our chips and head over to the cage. All right, you guys, that wraps up our 2-5 session here from Southern Indiana, basically Louisville, Kentucky. Got in that 2-5 for 1,000, topped up for 1,400 more, and then I got out for 28.67. So I ended up making 467 around 3 hours. Not too bad. Shout out to everyone that said hi. I give them some Wolfgang Poker stickers. So if you guys see me in the casino, definitely say hi. Hope you guys run good on the felt. Good luck as always. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. Thanks for watching to the end of my video. Click my head below to subscribe and stay in the loop. See you next time.